Hey, folks, and welcome again to 9 o'clock live. I guess YouTube's just kicking in. Hello, YouTube, 9 o'clock live. You know the deal. Right. So I've got a little bit of bad news for everybody, which is that Donald Trump is trying to subvert our democracy. I don't know if you know this, but today it was reported. Donald Trump just got and said it. It was reported that Donald Trump said that, well, he did it on live TV. So it wasn't really reported. He said on live TV that he is taking down the Postal Service with the intent of messing with the mail-in ballots and making it possible to vote by mail. So, there's really no two ways about it. This is about whether or not you believe more in a functioning government or believe more in power. And the Republicans have abandoned the idea that the United States should work as a functioning country so long as they hold power. Honestly, I think I might have said this before, but they've certainly lost the moral authority to govern. And I obviously fingers crossed for them to receive a shellacking in the upcoming election, not just for the White House, but in all of the Senate races as well, because the U.S. Senate's going to be a big part of this. Simon Sachs is high bet, and I say hi, Simon Sachs. So, that was just some news that came out today, but I don't think it told us anything we didn't already know or suspect. It's just sort of shocking and brazen to see somebody just outright say it, whether it was a slip of the tongue or intentional. It's just incredible to watch in real time somebody express, at least in a democracy like the United States, their dictatorial aims of suppressing the vote. However, there was some other news today, which was interesting. And honestly, this might be a short one because I don't necessarily know, there's not that much news that I want to talk about. But we'll see who jumps on and who starts commenting, because that's usually what makes these things go for an hour. But the other piece of news that I wanted to touch on was actually a peace deal which was brokered by the Trump administration in the Middle East. And it was sort of getting its play on Facebook, although really not in my circles, but I'm sure it's all over Fox News as like a giant achievement of the administration. So I wanted to make sure that people at least knew about it and knew some of the facts regarding it. So this is a deal, again, brokered by the Trump administration between the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Israel. The UAE is one of the, I suppose, important stakeholders in the Middle East. They have decent relations with the United States, but not such great relations with Saudi Arabia because of their opposing positions in the war in Yemen. In theory, Saudi Arabia is very gung-ho and all about influencing that war. UAE sort of undercover, or so it's suspected. In any event, the terms of the deal were that Israel would cease to attempt to annex or bring into its zone of control or really apply Israeli law to what is now Palestinian land. So it was basically a promise to halt annexation, which is actually giant. Like, the idea that Israel would do that after refusing to do it so much for so long, particularly Netanyahu, who's built his entire political career on, expanding Israel to what are perceived to be the ancient borders and taking all of the land. That just seems that's an incredible concession. And in return, the UAE will recognize Israel, withdraw any of its opposition to its existence, and in the next couple of months begin bilateral talks to open up trade and other diplomatic relations. But therein lies the rub. So according to the article, which I read in I believe the Jerusalem Post or something like this, the terms of this deal are, while they are concluded, but basically everything's in the future, which makes me really feel like this was a gift that Netanyahu gave Trump. In fact, maybe multiple players in the region gave Trump. Some folks have said this is really about Iran, and sort of people are incentivized to curtail Iran's growing power, which has been a thing for, 10 years. The Trump administration, though, promised that they'd be reaching a deal with Iran after the election. And so for me, I feel like a lot of this is about players in the Middle East who want Donald Trump to remain in power because they view him their best ally in the White House. Israel obviously is the prime component here. They made what seems to be the biggest concessions in this deal. And Netanyahu obviously very, very much in bed with the Trump administration because he gets almost unending support and just kind of ridiculous support from the Trump administration. No matter what Israel does, Donald Trump's there to back them up and say, yeah, take all of Israel. Yeah, take all of Jerusalem. It just would seem very, very savvy of Netanyahu. And, the Netanyahu who came to the United States to deliver a speech to Congress, which was basically, elect Donald Trump, I believe. Or he supports Donald Trump. It would seem that this is quite the boon to Donald Trump during an election year, and with all of the benefits pretty far off in the future, right? So this promise to cease annexation, really, according to sources in the White House and in the Israeli government, is really more of a suspension. There's not a permanent treaty that's going to prevent annexation, and they're still going to look to impose Israeli law over the Palestinian territories. It's annexation in everything but name, right? They're still not ordering the evacuation of any of the settlements. So what really is this? I think it's a political maneuver, but it would actually be great if Israel promised not to creation of a Palestinian state on the land which Israel is currently occupying, and if the UAE withdrew its objections to Israel and they opened up bilateral negotiations and trade, because it would bring a lot more stability and peace to the region. And if with the promise not to annex the West Bank, the other Arab nations came along with the UAE, this would actually be really tremendous. The particulars of any two-state solution obviously yet to be hammered out, but one of the main dynamics perpetuating this conflict is not the Israelis and the Palestinians at each other's throat. It's the fact that all of the other Arab states back the Palestinian position, which makes it a geopolitical problem, and therefore resolving that would create a lot more breathing room for finding a peaceful resolution, because you wouldn't have people who are using the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for geopolitical aims. All right, so this would be very, very incredible and really great, except for the fact that, again, basically it's all promised by Donald Trump if he wins in November. So I think that should give folks a lot of pause. We've not had a lot of luck with treaties really working out from the Trump administration. Lots of promises, not a lot of things put to paper, although all the parties have sort of said this is a thing. However, I will say that the UAE statement is not as strong as the United States' and Israel's statement. The UAE said that there is a suspension of annexation, sort of in line with what diplomats in the White House and Israel said, which is not a permanent promise to not proceed with annexation, so a suspension, and that they were investigating. They made a commitment to explore opening relations over the next few months. Again, which puts the time horizon beyond the U.S. presidential election. So you know, you don't want to. You don't want to be like super skeptical of everything. Like you have to be skeptical, I guess, at this point. But you want to believe these things are true, but at the same time, you have to analyze the details and the actual probability of success, right? Like Netanyahu making this concession now to ensure that his buddy or to help his buddy get reelected in November is a small step for him. It's a small matter for him. It's like when Iran didn't release hostages. They obviously didn't want to go to war with the United States, but they just didn't release hostages until Jimmy Carter lost the election. And then they released the hostages after Reagan won. And this is basically the reverse of that. So I just wanted to let folks know that should be on your radar because I'm sure it's going to be talked about in the election, especially regarding foreign policy and who's better at formulating peace. They're probably going to try to paint Biden as a war hawk. There's a lot of clips of him on the Foreign Intelligence Committee, chairing the Foreign Intelligence Committee in the Senate around the Iraq War. Honestly, not saying the greatest things. And really, it's, pushing for the Bush administration's war in Iraq. And I'm sure this is going to come up in terms of portrayals of how each candidate would handle the Middle East differently. And I just want to say that while this would be a big step in the right direction, it looks like it's a lot of bluster. Honestly, it does. Let's see. Simon's got some thoughts. I'm sorry Michael Kaplan's not here because this is exactly the kind of thing he'd want to weigh in on. Oh, well, Ben, you give a good analysis. I think this is a very good development. Sooner the better. Netanyahu probably did make his move faster. If you could clarify that, that'd be great. But dropping annexation and normalizing relations is good for all. I don't think this helps Trump. It just gets some temporary shade, but not much more. It does crush Hamas's position. I think Trump gets a lot of mileage out of this because one of the huge things that people who don't like the Democratic Party, in particular Joe Biden, tout about Trump is that he's the only president not to have started a new war or perpetuated war since, World War II, which is not true. Barack Obama didn't, well, they'll talk about all the drone strikes, and I want to be clear about this. Donald Trump has drone struck more people than Barack Obama did in 8 years, okay? Donald Trump in 4 years, well, he hasn't quite exceeded the 8-year drone strike amount, but he's getting really close. By the end of his 4th year, by the end of his term, there's a possibility he will have launched more drone strikes and killed more people than Barack Obama. It's just that it gets no attention because of all the other trash that's going on. But I actually do get, because of Donald Trump's reputation as a peacenik, however ill-deserved that might be, he's going to get a lot of mileage out of this, particularly against Joe Biden, who, of course, voted for the Iraq War, was fairly a vocal proponent of it at the time. So I don't know if this just stays here. I again, though, because all the benefits of this thing are after the election, I just think, and it doesn't look like there's going to be a piece of paper. It doesn't look like there's going to be a treaty. There was just a verbal agreement. I just don't see this being something. I see this being played up a lot, but I don't see it as anything that an informed person allow Donald Trump to use as a talking point, really, unless we see more from it. And that is really what I want to inform people about here. Simon Sachs, but it does sound too good to be true. Yes. Well, that's basically what I've been saying. It's not contingent on a Trump victory. Biden will be in the same position if he wins. These things usually sound a little bit of fantasy about what occurs. These things usually sound a little bit of fantasy. I'm not 100% sure what you mean, but I think what you're trying to say is Biden will be in the same position if he wins, and these are all usually based around some degree of hopeful, wishful thinking. But okay, Biden will be in the same position if he wins, but what I'm saying is that this is something that Netanyahu is doing, and maybe even folks in the UAE, because they benefit from a weakened America. I think a lot of people benefit from a weakened America, particularly because the United States, for whatever people want to say about the Democrats and the United States generally have been strong allies to Israel. And the stronger the United States is, the better off Israel is, generally speaking. So Netanyahu wants Trump because he has unconditional support, and everybody else wants Trump because they want America to go down the tubes. All right. So that's basically what I'm saying, that like Biden won't be in the same position because people won't stand to gain from a Biden administration, and they will make his life difficult, and it will sort of put things back to the status quo. I have to imagine that Trump promised things to Netanyahu or agreed with things that Netanyahu was doing in exchange, and in order to get Netanyahu to agree to cease annexation. And, you know, there was a point made in the things I was reading, which was that Trump publicly said that Israel was wrong to annex the West Bank, but that in a private conversation with Netanyahu, I don't know if it was private, but in a conversation with Netanyahu, he was basically like, you know, you shouldn't do it, but you're doing the right thing for Israel. Basically, he's like, you shouldn't do it, but you're doing the right thing. And that's not really the position that the U.S. president should be espousing. If what the States wants and what the president purports to want is that Israel not take territory or occupy territory or formally claim sovereignty over territory, which is integral to reaching a peace agreement. So that is why, you know, I think this could very well evaporate if Donald Trump wins, but also I think it could evaporate even if he doesn't. Once he wins, because we don't have a parliamentary system where a president can be removed with a vote of no confidence midterm, you know, which is a fair bit easier than, say, an impeachment, then Netanyahu will be free to do what it is that he wants, and people will largely have gotten, assuming that the objective of this is to give Trump a boost. And look, that's very cynical perhaps to say, but given what the UAE and Israel get out of this and what Israel gave up to make this happen, even though, and I want to actually let's rehash that. What did Israel give up to get this? They promised, according to the UAE, to suspend their annexation plans, which is not the same thing as permanently kiboshing them, which is kind of what Trump and Israel are implying. Without any real solid commitment there for a long-term, situation, it's very much. I think it's okay to be cynical. So, this is not something. Once Trump is reelected, all of the people who got what they wanted on the assumption that reelecting Trump or giving him a boost is what they wanted, everybody will have already received the payoff, and there'll be very little incentive to continue with it. Simon Sachs, it's not contingent on a Trump victory. Biden will be in the same position. Oh yeah, right. So that was the comment. So I think we can argue whether or not it's contingent on a Trump victory, or even whether this is a real agreement made in good faith with plans to really have a long-term bilateral relationship between the UAE and Israel, and for Israel to, in a long-term sense, suspend its annexation of the West Bank, which, just given the history of Netanyahu's administration and his time as prime minister, seems really out of character. But I'm not the closest Israel watcher, so I could be wrong. Michael Kaplan, who's finally joined and whose opinion I won't. Point of history. The Palestinians were never an independent state. West Bank was Jordan, Gaza was Egypt. Yes. Israel offered the lands back in peace negotiations, and Egypt and Jordan refused to take them back. The Jordanians and Egyptians did not miss having to deal with constant civil unrest. Right. Which isn't really about the matter at hand, but thank you for your point of history. We all know a little bit more now. I'm not sure I knew this. So they offered to return the West Bank lands that were taken in the 67 war to Egypt and Jordan, and they refused to receive them. So Israel was left to govern them until a Palestinian state could be created, which has never happened. Fascinating. But I've sort of exhausted what I want to say. I think we've gone through all the comments. Not a super active night, which is fine. I'm going to go do a little work then and have some food. So thanks, everybody who tuned in. And hopefully I'll see you tomorrow at 9 p.m. Till then.